Hello, I'm Reverend Scott Wipperman, pastor here at First Presbyterian Church in Helena, Montana, and we welcome you to our worship service today. I'd like you to know that regardless of who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, you're welcome here at First Presbyterian Church. Our New Testament reading, Gospel reading, comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, and you can find that on page 1630 in your pew Bibles. This is a familiar story. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming this way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." The word of the Lord. Well, there was trouble in Habakkuk's world. Babylon was rising to become a world power, the dominant world power. And the last time this happened 100 years ago wasn't so good. Assyria was rising to become a world power, and they came and were besieging Jerusalem and were outside its gates until one morning when 185,000 of the Assyrian troops just didn't wake up. And so Habakkuk had reason to be concerned about this rise of Babylon's power, because soon Judea would feel the destruction of Babylon. And so he's complaining to God about this violence that's out there, this injustice that is there. He's asking God questions. Why does this persist? Why do you allow this to go on? And then he waits. You hear that he'll stand by in the text. When you hear of ramparts, when you hear of watchtowers, when you hear of things like that from the prophets, it's always a sign of expectation. And Habakkuk will wait patiently for God's answers to these questions. And God does answer Habakkuk. He says, "Don't worry. I've got a plan. Trust me." Write it down plainly so that all can see it and all will know it. Wait patiently for it. It won't come quickly. It may linger a bit, but it will come in its appointed time. You can count on that. It will be here. And then we jump forward to the story of Jesus entering Jericho, the old city whose walls fell down, remember? He's coming into the city, and Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, hears that he's coming. Now, tax collectors were not well liked, to put it mildly. I mean, many people there took a look at tax collectors as supporting the enemy. They were there collecting money for the Roman occupation of their country. And so they were viewed as traitors even. to their homeland. And not only that, but tax collectors had a tendency to collect more than what was due. Now, tax collectors were citizens of Israel, and at their tax collecting booth, they always also had one or two Roman centurions standing there next to them. So you'd come up to pay your taxes. You think negotiating with the IRS is tough? Try bargaining down how much tax you owed, or disputing the amount that this tax collector was saying you needed to pay. So they would skim some off the top and become wealthy through this process. Wealthy off of the backs of their fellow citizens, of their neighbors. Much like what's happening with the EpiPen and Daraprim, raising prices of drugs 500% or 5,000%. So tax collectors were not liked. And probably not helping the situation, Zacchaeus was short. And so he was probably easily looked down upon. But Zacchaeus hears that Jesus is coming to town, and he wants to see who this Jesus person is. But there are many crowds, and he can't see, so he does a very undignified thing for a grown man. He climbs this sycamore tree so that he can look over the road and see Jesus coming. Now, if you go to Jericho today, you can find not one, but 3 Zacchaeus trees. 3 trees are supposedly the tree that Zacchaeus climbed to see Jesus. 2 of these trees are alive. One of these trees is dead and kind of encased in a building. But if it's a live tree, it's been around for 2,000 years. I don't know if sycamores live that long, but you can find these there in Jericho. But Jesus is walking down the road, and he looks up and he sees this short man up in a tree. And he calls him by name, and he says, "Zacchaeus, come down. I am to stay and to eat with you." And the crowds mutter. Surprise, huh? No, you can imagine this. Here is this holy man coming into town, and he's going to go eat and stay with the effective poster child for Roman occupation and oppression. You know, he's not staying with good Rabbi Smith. He's not going with the fine widow Jones and to have or one of the good people in town. No, he's going with this detested person and is going to have dinner and stay at his house. Now, an interesting thing in the story here is it's a little confusing from the text as to the exact location where the next part of the conversation goes on. Are they there, right there at the foot of that sycamore tree? Or have they gone, and are they now in Zacchaeus' house when this next part of the conversation comes along? But Zacchaeus says, "I will give half of my possessions to the poor, to the least of these, your children. And for anyone I've wronged, I will right it 4 times over." Now you can imagine that this is an amazing proclamation from someone who has been basically stealing from his fellow man for who knows how long. And if it's made in the private, in his house, with Jesus and maybe some of the disciples and a few other guests, it's pretty amazing. But if it's out there in public, at the foot of the tree that he was in, it's even more outstanding that he would sit there and make this proclamation for all to hear. 1, saying he's giving away half of his wealth, and 2, essentially admitting that he'd been cheating his fellow man and saying that he was going to make amends for that cheating. But the people were muttering. Now you notice in most other stories in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Jesus always seems to know what people are thinking or what they're complaining about, or what they're saying, whether it be disciples, or whether it be rabbis, or whether it be people in town. But in this particular instance, he doesn't respond to the crowd and their muttering. He just goes on with what he's doing with Zacchaeus. And in the absence of saying something to the crowd, it's almost like he is saying, stick with me now. I have a plan. Trust me. But we have violence, we have injustice, we have all this in our society too. We see much violence of people being killed and injured in wars or in other violent acts. People suffering in many ways. But there's also the injustice of when those who don't seem worthy reap wonderful rewards. Quite often in our society, wealth. And others who are such good and people and doing such good work seem to get so little of the attention or the wealth or the rewards. So we too ask, how long do we have to see this violence? How long do we have to wait for this? Why don't you intercede? Occasionally we get glimpses of this justice interceding. You know, when you're driving along and someone just whips around you dangerously, or maybe doesn't run to the stop sign in front of you, and lo and behold, there happens to be a police car right there. And the blue light starts flashing, and you just kind of go, yeah. Or maybe when Mark Schelkick gets thrown in jail, not for raising the price of Daraprim, but for some former misbehaving in his hedge fund, illegal trading in hedge fund things. But Turing Pharmaceuticals that put out that drug, that they raised the price so much, it's great to see that their stock price has gone from about $250 down to less than 1/10 of that. On Friday it closed at $20.35. So you say, yes, there's some justice here. But we too want to see this. We too question, why does this injustice have to persist? Why does it exist like this? We too want to complain, why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife, conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. But God and Jesus have a plan. You could see it unfold quickly in the Zacchaeus story. Jesus has a plan, and it turns Zacchaeus around in an instant. In just one look from the top of a tree, Zacchaeus turns completely. In the Old Testament story with Habakkuk, it would take a while. God tells Habakkuk, I have a plan. Don't worry. It may linger. It will come at its appointed time. Be sure of that. So don't worry. I've got a plan. Trust me. And so do we trust when we're faced with this injustice and this violence in our society? Do we trust that God has a plan? He calls us to do that. He calls us there because quite often we do plea, why do you make me look at this violence? Why do you make me look at this injustice that's all around? And Jesus, when he revealed his plan in turning around Zacchaeus, he made it plain to us I have come to seek and save what was lost. Like Zacchaeus, who was lost in pursuit of wealth, stealing from his neighbors like this was going to save him somehow. Zacchaeus, who was lost, who was out of contact with the humanity around him, who didn't have any relationship with the neighbors and the people he was citizens with in this community. And like Zacchaeus, who it seems sensed finally that he was so lost that he'd do anything to get a glimpse of Jesus. He even climbed that tree. Lost, like the people of Judea, committing themselves to idols, seeking their own comfort, neglecting their neighbors. Like we who were lost, looking for meaning and purpose through bank balances, through technology, through the numbers of friends that we have on social media, the number of likes we get on our posts, through our status, our title, maybe our corner office, or maybe how high we've gotten on the social ladder, even if it required stepping on a few people on the process of getting up to that rung. Christ comes seeking the lost. He comes to claim us as his, to embrace us tightly until all the lostness is squeezed out of us and we recognize that we are his, that we belong, and to usher us who were previously wrecks of human potential into God's kingdom, putting flesh on those dry bones and making that Grinch heart grow 3 times in size that day to become even more wonderful. So, let me wrap up with 2 things. First, what will you do to see Jesus? What trees would you climb to catch a glimpse, just one glimpse, of our Lord and our Savior? And 2, if just one glimpse turns Zacchaeus around, turns Zacchaeus into someone living from someone who was dead, what might 2 glimpses do? So stick with me. I have a plan. Trust me, is what he says.